What you are afraid of in the smallest ways or largest ways, whichever it may be, is the possibility of an unfavorable outcome. There are two primary factors to consider. Let's take a closer look from this existential truth. The first is the possibility. The possibility is an image in the mind which is attached to a desire of the favorable, thereby forming resistance to the opposite energy. The second is the character associated with the possibility. The character involved in the possibility does not exist yet. It is also a projection because that relationship between character and possibility is not a happening reality. How peculiar is it that one could be taking oneself to be someone who isn't happening? Who are you is a question made famous by Ramana Maharishi. But what the question points to is the reality which is able to watch this dynamic of possibility combining with a projected character. When are you is another question that helps to bring your awareness a little bit closer to reality and out of the projections of past or future. If it's not happening, it isn't actually applicable. Now, do you understand the mechanism of fear? When it is understood, the letting go, the surrender can be understood. Freedom from the concept of future can be understood. Reality is in a closer embrace. But not because it's something that was attained, but rather some kind of evolution of our higher individual in its dualistic state of relationship with existence is maturing. Your spirit isn't living in time. The body is living in time, along with the interplay of it and the mind and the emotions. But the spirit is living in the present, beyond the present. What does this mean? It means that right now, without the label of present or right now-ness, something is already here. Something is already existing this moment, one with it. And when the mind brings in concepts of future, then that which is here seems to be clouded and become a secondary place of existence, which gets neglected in the trade-off for the projection and fantasy of the future instead of the happening reality. But in the present, where all is happening, everything from the smallest atom to the largest cosmic body and beyond that, it's all happening right now. But if we become identified with a particular definition about what's happening, at that moment of identification, we've already traded reality for an illusion. And this illusion can be a very subtle illusion, such as, just a moment ago, and then fill in the blank. That I, a moment ago, isn't the one watching the story. In a moment, I'm going to fill in the blank. That I that's going to whatever in a moment, it isn't the one that sees the story unfolding in the present, that can notice those thoughts. So, to eliminate fear, we can also look at the acronym, which is perhaps a cliche, but it is still useful, that fear is false evidence appearing real. It appears in the form of projections in the mind. That which is able to perceive the projections. Who is that one? That's the question. Who are you? With its depth exposed. The mind can be very creative in whatever projections it presents to that which is able to perceive the projections. And the moment a projection is believed to be who one is, in other words, an identity is formed, and that identity is mixed in with a projection. When this happens, that identity can only be a mental identity, one who is engaged in and involved with the problem that seems to be framed in some kind of a lacking element. Something isn't right yet. And this feeling of yet is what gives that identity of fear, even the subtlest form of that identity of fear, some kind of an appearance of being real. So when this appearance of reality as an identity who's mixed in with a projection called fear of something that's going to happen, or not having enough and needing something better, and so the future appears much better. So there's a fear of being present because this projection is believed. Well, all one needs to do is let go. Enough to recognize, wait a minute, that's future. I'm not in the future. That's enough to step out of, at least one step back from that identity, the strength of that identity. From there, one can begin questioning once again, who is it that is able to notice this? And with this question, at this point, the identity that's mixed in with the fear is obviously seen to be different. Perhaps it's not seen to be different yet. For some who have let go enough to see, it is visible that that identity is not who they are. That identity is not anything outside of the mind and its projections and imagination. And if the fear goes on too long for the one who can't seem to step away, at least take that first step back and say, is this who I am? Or is this a character that I'm watching unfold in a story about somewhere that isn't here and now? Then for the one that can't step away, they're believing that that's who they are. They can't evolve further from that as long as they're believing that that's who they are. And they will suffer anxiety and more fear and repetition of the need to fulfill something, all the way until that belief has been exhausted, at least for a while. The ego wants to be creative. The ego can't stand presence. The ego must perpetuate problems. Problems. Where is the root of the problems, though? See, if one can look at the root of the problems, then one can eliminate the believing in the identity once and for all. with vigilance, the identity that the ego presents of lack and fear and unwholesomeness, feelings of angst and lack and loss. And when the ego uses the past, the grief of not enough in the past, so a better future is needed, comes in. It's a vicious cycle, but the root of this cycle is all about avoiding the present moment. The ego can't live in the present moment. It can only seem to live in the story in the mind. So everything the ego does, which there is innumerable combinations and methods that the ego can use, the egoistic mind can use to project that such an identity is real. But the moment that story meets presence, it can't survive. It can't enter the present. Because it isn't real. It's like Pinocchio before it becomes a real boy. But Pinocchio becomes the real boy in the story. Well, in this analogy using Pinocchio, that which is real is already real. So this would be like Pinocchio coming along and trying to hijack himself as the real one, but as a fake Pinocchio, as a fake boy. So the fake boy is running around trying to become the real boy as a fake boy. That would be an awful cartoon. But maybe it wouldn't. Maybe some would enjoy it. I don't know. So the one who's looking can see when all these different people show up who are acting the same way that this fake Pinocchio would act. The fake Pinocchio running around saying, "It's got it." The one that can see it can see the fake Pinocchio running around saying, "It's got it." But that's the one that's looking from within. That's the one who's already real, who can see it, Who is it that can see it? Who else could it be except the one that's seeing? So, so there's no need for a fake Pinocchio to go running around looking to become real. Enough of the Pinocchio. That's a good cartoon. A lot of good moral, valuable lessons are in that cartoon. But what's deeper? What's deeper than a cartoon and the comics? The humor. That which is always and forever reality beyond anything that could possibly ever become something. Become something different. Paradoxically, there is an evolution that takes place beyond the phenomenal realm that we are familiar with in this manifest world that persons seem to be living in. But that only happens through surrender. It doesn't happen through doing it. It doesn't happen through becoming it. This surrender requires awareness in presence. Awareness, first of all, of who one is, and the presence enough to embody that truth in the present, beyond the mind, where this reality is happening, beyond the emotions, where this reality is happening, where this reality is happening beyond the body sensations. This kind of evolution is the evolution in the dimension of grace. It cannot be understood by the mind. It happens beyond it, not at all within it. There seems to be a stigma around the word surrender, so I want to touch on that for a moment. Surrender is not about losing power to some other opposing, dominating force, which the mind would love to project as something that's out to get you, something that's out to get me. I better not do that. This kind of evolution, which requires surrender, is not the byproduct of doing. Surrender is like the undoing of doing. But it is in this undoing of doing that the power which your mind would tell you you're giving away to some force that's going to do you harm, perhaps it comes up with some other story. But this power is restored in the surrender. But if the mind gets a hold of this concept and says, oh, that's how I get power, that's just another way of hanging on. So there's a threshold that one has to find within where the letting go happens, but there's not a new grasping for something. There's not a new agenda to immediately jump into to go and get and go after something. Surrender is the letting go of that whole dynamic. And this kind of surrender, because it undoes doing, what it is also doing is allowing you, the aware consciousness, the spirit behind the activity, to notice the programming and the conditioning that's present, that wants to repeat itself. And by sitting in this heat of fear, if you will, bringing presence into that instead of engaging that, this is the transcendence or the evolution out of that conditioned fear. No longer at this point does it have the ability to deep root itself anymore. So one is able to let go and is able to keep pulling presence into anything that would arise and take the identity and try to combine it with some form of lacking element. Who are you who can see these dynamics? You must first understand who you really, really, really are. Then, this sanctification process, as it would be termed in biblical context, can actually have meaning. It can be understood only after one has recognized, meaning come to the place in the present moment where you are looking from. Only once that true position of seeing is embodied can any of this sanctification process happen. Can it be utilized or mean anything or have any kind of value? But it isn't really the teaching that's providing the value. The teaching is simply pointing you to stay present in truth so that grace can work on you. Your surrender away from past and future and away from the patterns of fearful identities which get projected again and again. Your presence into the freshness of the moment, which is without story. That which sees the story. If you see the story, You can thereby recognize that you are what's looking at the story. Both of those thoughts are thoughts only. You can't get it by the thoughts. You get it by seeing the thoughts and recognizing that they are not who you are. That recognition in the present moment, this moment, there's no need for lack. There's no need for the story of lack. One can only be with what's happening in reality. One can only do to the extent that doing can happen in reality. Your intelligence is the facet of your individual nature which is able to interface, interact with these different levels of manifestation of your individual nature. You, the intelligence. You, the spiritual being who is also intelligent. You're not a static awareness who's always just looking in the background. Your intelligence is able to partly remain still without separation and partly be dynamic without separation from the stillness. It's okay if you haven't met that degree of depth in your own experience. But understand that as you let go of past and future, you're deepening into the domain of grace. Something works on you in the present. When you become present, so to speak, something works on you. That is what gets understood after it occurs. Not before, not in something that can be shared in textbooks or through any kind of media. Nothing. Nothing can go there because that domain where you are already is the domain which belongs to grace, which belongs to the higher divinity of existence. It doesn't matter if you believe that or not, because I'm not here to help you believe. I'm here to help you test your existence so that you can prove your beliefs. Prove what you're believing and whether or not it has valid direction. If you don't prove what you're believing in, you're following something blindly. That's not the goal of spirituality. That's not the goal of religion in its pure form. I'm not talking about the tainted word religion, which speaks of all kinds of worldly activity getting mingled in as the main agenda. Religion means to reunite, to bring together again. So, what does that mean? That means that the one who believes that they are separate from any kind of reality where God is a reality, the one who doesn't believe in God because they haven't seen God, because they believe themselves to be totally separate from any kind of proof of that kind of a reality, it means that that separation is healed. That's what religion means. But it isn't about forcing anybody to follow that. People are already following the call in their hearts. They don't understand that that call is only a homing beacon to truth. But they will. Everybody comes to that threshold. Everybody who's consciously with the capacity to do so. How do we eliminate that gap? What is religion? How do we embody the pure religion? The scriptures in the Bible speak about pure religion, and that such is helping widows and orphans, and keeping oneself unspotted by the world. I think that's in James, but I'm not sure right now. The second part is the hard part to understand in that scripture. Because what does it mean to be unspotted by the world? It's easy to go and do honorable, wholesome things to help the community, the widows and the orphans, to take care of them, help them with their needs. It's much easier to do that than it is to understand what it means to be spotted by the world. It's the identities that get in the way. When one believes in the identity that the world holds, then this personal, separate self seems to become some kind of a manifestation. It isn't real, it's just some kind of form that gets filled with your attention. And as long as your attention is in that form, you're going to animate that form. It's going to be animated. Perhaps not totally by your own volition, because it has its own framework. It has its own mental construct and confines. It's very much like a sock puppet, metaphorically speaking. If you take your hand out of the sock and you set the sock down, it no longer has any kind of animating quality to it. The character in the story in the mind is exactly the same. But it's your attention that fills it. It's your attention and your believing in it that gives it its animating quality. You can remove that and simply place it on something that's not manifested. the direction of your attention has everything to do with your understanding of maturing via surrender, purifying via surrender, and your understanding of surrender itself. The direction of the attention is what dictates whether or not surrender is occurring. So fear, you can surrender from fear. You can let fear be present, but you can surrender from fear, not to fear. You don't surrender to fear. That's giving all of your power to fear. And then you just become more fearful, it seems. You're not that one. You're the one who's giving the power into that manifestation. So when fear emerges, all you have to do is not identify. You're not doing that. You're just not doing that. It's simple. It's so simple that you don't do anything with that. It shows up, you see it. It goes, you see it go, and the storm is over. Blessings.